Hey guys, it's Daniel. Welcome back.
The vocal harmony between Layne and Jerry is arguably the most iconic thing about the sound of Alice in Chains. In 2017, at a rock fantasy camp, Jerry Cantrell said the following about Layne Staley's harmonies with him. Quote, "All the bands that I've been a fan of used harmonies or had multiple singers. Kiss, The Who, Pink Floyd, The Beatles, and the ultimate one, The Eagles. I always love bands with multiple voices and harmonies. So the combination of Layne and we developed early on an easy way to work together that way. As far as writing that type of stuff, if I didn't have it, he had it. If he didn't have it, I had it. We developed a language and a sound by singing that way. As it went on, like with the Sap EP, I started to sing some lead, and continued to grow along those lines with every record we did. My role became bigger. With the support of Layne egging me on to sing more, it really became a two-vocal band. Having William DuVall today, William and I work within the same context. Although, of course, William and Layne are two completely different guys, two completely different voices, it still works because we work together in the same sort of context." End quote. In an interview from March of 2022, journalist Stephen Hill asked Jerry the following question. Quote, "Your connection with Layne, the way your voices melded together, was such a huge part of Alice in Chains. How natural and easy of a connection was that?" This was Jerry's response. Quote, "Layne was just an amazing talent. He had a real unique and powerful voice, but he had a sensitivity and touch to it as well. The way that I wrote and the way that he wrote blended together so well, we felt like a natural fit. He had more horsepower than me. I'm not going to be able to do the Brian Johnson gargled razor blades, but together, we had something that the other didn't. Think of the Beatles, Pink Floyd, the Eagles, that attitude of, you take this line and I'll take that one. It adds more color to the canvas." End quote. In an interview with journalist Mark Lohr for Vice in 2018, Jerry added the following. Quote, "Layne was just an incomparable talent. He was like a mynah bird. Any accent or sound or voice, he could just immediately repeat it. He just had a gift. And I like to think I have a bit of a gift myself. Together, we were kind of a two-headed monster. It added a lot of depth to the material the way we worked together, and that would later be continued with the addition of William." End quote. Now, I want to share with you a clip from one of my interviews with Alice in Chains recording engineer Jonathan Plum, where he discusses what Layne and Jerry's creative relationship was like. If you want to see the full interview, the link is available below. So in general, from your experience working with Alice in Chains, were there any particular microphones that Layne preferred using, or was he not picky?
I would say on the gear wise, and you're asking if Layne had any specific, my impression was Layne, and I think everybody sort of knows this, the history was sort of Jerry was really like the overseer of everything of Alice in Chains in general, was kind of the main creative force from my perspective of when they came in the studio. It was like really Jerry was kind of overseeing everything, and Layne would really just come into the studio when he was needed. He typically just hung out on the couch. Either he just wasn't there, or he'd be hanging out on the couch watching cartoons and eating cereal, and generally stayed out of like Jerry's way during most of the creative process. So it just seemed like, okay, now it's time for vocals, bring Layne in. That's what it seemed like from my end. So Layne would just come in and we'd have the mic set up. There was no comments, or, Layne just went into the booth and started singing. So I feel like he had no specific, care or interest in what he was singing in. Some artists are particular about that. Many experienced artists will come in and say, well, I'd like this microphone or whatever. But I'd say for the most part, artists leave it up to us to decide what's best. Maybe to jump forward now. So with Toby Wright on Charro Flies and the later stuff, what Toby did was we were in Seattle, right? So there's not a lot of resources in Seattle as far as the music business is concerned. So he rented a whole bunch of like really high-end boutique microphones from LA. So there's companies in LA that will rent you like precious and one-of-a-kind microphones. And he rented probably like 3 or 4 different like really boutique vintage microphones. Like he would have had a 47 FET, a tube one. He would have had a U67, which is a tube also. And I can't remember what else, but there was like a handful of really nice. And so what we did is we set up 4 or 5 different microphones and quickly had Layne come in and sing a little bit on each microphone and just reviewed what sounded best. And gosh, I want to say It might have been the U47 that we used for Jar of Flies and later, but it was definitely one of the vintage ones. And it was definitely a tube mic. And I do remember specifically at that point we were running through an LA2A compressor, which I think we had rented for that as well. And I know we talked about this before, that we were getting distortion probably off the compressor or the tube microphone, because he was just, his volume, was just so massive. I do love this story. And this was early. This was with Sap. In fact, this is the first time I worked with Layne. Facelift was like my favorite record. And, I knew him as a screamer, but that particular day we were doing something off of Sap and he was singing really quietly and he was struggling with it, like we were talking about earlier. And I remember it sounded really great, but I really wanted to hear Layne do the Layne thing. He wasn't doing the Layne thing. I was kind of disappointed not to get to hear that in the studio. That, this is again the first time I'd worked with him, and he was really struggling with this part. And he came out of the booth, and I remember he just was pissed, and he yelled, "Fuck!" It's like, "Fuck!" But that was the Layne scream. That's the first time I heard that. I know I've told you the story before, but it is pretty fun. And it was, that's a great story, man. To hear it, like, it was like 5 feet away from me. It was like, whoa, there it is. That's the Layne. And then later, I did get to hear him sing it in the studio, actually sing that full voice thing. And he was just incredible.